Hi, this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. Today we're going to go back a little bit. I'm going to work on a Shakespeare Tidewater 30L. This one happens to be with the line counter, but the 30L was around for quite some time, and it's one that's kind of got a nice design to it. It's held up over time, and if there's anything that's of issue here, it's parts availability. And if there are any viewers out there that are working on a reel that need parts for this reel, I may be your source. I had the opportunity about 8 or 9 years ago to purchase a job lot from one of my distributors who just had a bunch of parts reels that were the Tidewaters. I put quite a few of them back together, and what remains is parts, and if you need the parts, I'll make them available to you. Just send me a note to my email, the Second Chance Tackle at gmail.com. Also, if you're viewing this for the first time and you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. That's what keeps my channel going. So we're going to take apart the Shakespeare. Gary actually sent me to a Shakespeare, and he sent me a Pen 320. We've done the 320 on videos before, so while I will service that for Gary, I won't be doing the video. Back to the parts for just a moment. There's a few parts I don't have. I don't have the tension cap. I don't have a replacement star adjuster. Those things seem to break. These are pretty flimsy plastic pieces, but other than that, if you're looking for internal parts or side plates or that, chances are that I have some of those parts. Okay, let's get started then. Shakespeare always made a nice durable product at a reasonable price. I think these reels at the time were probably selling in the $30 range, maybe $40 at the most. This one has a line counter feature on it. I don't know if I've talked much about line counters in the past. I'm not a fan of them. There is a purpose to them, but to me, here on the northeast Atlantic seaboard, we fish salt water primarily. Salt water wreaks havoc on line counters, and that's probably one of the places where they would be best for that. If you were using this as a trolling reel, you would be letting out line and then noting where your strikes were, and then this enables you to let out line to that general area again if they're in that water column. And that'll, most of the time, it'll work to your advantage to have something like that. But in this case, with the salt water, a lot of times the line counters clog up. There gets to be water intrusion in there, and it comes in from every place. It looks sealed here, but it'll come in behind the spool and the like, jam up the gears. The gears wind up breaking, and then in this case, there's no replacement parts for it anyway, but it just becomes one more thing to break. All right, you saw me take the handle and that off. While we're doing the preliminaries for this servicing, always good to remind you, wear some protection. In this case, I have a glove protecting my hand from the greases and the like. Also take pictures. We're taking pictures here with the video. Use your cell phone, use a digital camera, use a video, whatever, but mark the places along the way where you're making some critical steps or taking some pieces and parts off so that you can remember when you reinstall if you get stuck. Okay, this one's a nice one. It has a bearing underneath. I'll pull the bearing out, and then it's got a bushing. I don't know if the bushing will come out. It has a bushing, a bearing, a bushing. Then it has these tension washers for the drag. They come next. And then we're on the internal side of the reel. Between the bushing and the bearing, there is that little shim washer that sort of protects the bushing, so just make sure that it's in that sequence when you go to reinstall. Okay, I'm going to put all of those into a parts tray. It's another thing that I use, as many of you who are steady viewers of this know. It's just a nice place to go find this when it's time to reassemble the reel. Okay, that one's too big. These have Phillips head screws in there. They're a coarse threaded screw. Most of the time, these may be, this is a metal case, so these are a fine threaded screw. There's other examples of this one where they're going into a plastic case, and that those are coarse threaded. These happen to be machine threads. Okay, so when I take these out, I do lay them side by side because I want to make sure that they go back in the same place. I noticed that long screw here, short screw here. So again, you want to, I'm taking these off in sort of a counterclockwise direction just to make sure. but I want to keep these so that I know when I go back to reassemble the reel. Okay, that's a long screw. So it looks like the crossbars have the short screws and the case screws are longer. And that seems to be the way it's playing out. That just came out of a crossbar. Okay, and this is the last of the screws that will release the case. And that's the way it is. So the 3 that go into the case are long screws. The 2 that go into the crossbars are short screws. Always pay attention to that. Just don't haphazardly take the screws off, just placing them into your parts tray or whatever, only to find out that when you go to reassemble, something's wrong. All right, we're going to pull the side plate off then. This is the first look at your side plate. Here's our spool. This is a hard plastic spool. And underneath here is the drive mechanisms for the level wind feature. I'm just checking right now on this idler gear to make sure all the teeth are there. Hopefully we can see that. Also just noticing that the worm is properly rotating as well. Alright, I'm just going to grab a cotton swab, clean up some of the dry grease. It doesn't appear to be too much in there. If you needed to replace the idler gear and the other pieces of this reel, like the line counter and the like, you would need to take the other side plate off. In this case, we're just doing a general servicing on that, making sure it's cleaned and re-lubed, so we don't need to remove any of the side plate there. You can if you like. I'm just going to grab a brush and some reel grease then. In this case, I'm using Penn Precision reel grease. Any major manufacturer's reel grease will do. I guess this is actually the Penn manufacturer's grease now, because Shakespeare became part of Pure Fishing, and Pure Fishing is also the parent company to Penn, so I guess we're okay there. Alright, the other thing I'm going to do on the case before we get too far down the road, I'm just going to put a drop of oil into the pawl. That'll ensure that it rotates freely. To do that, you remove the pawl cap. The pawl is right underneath, and all you have to do is just put a drop of oil on there. And I'm using Reel X, which is a synthetic reel oil. Again, there's multiple manufacturers of the reel greases and the oils. Just use the one that's appropriate for fishing reels. Don't save a nickel by using 3-in-1 oil or some of those other things. You're welcome to. If that's all you have, go right ahead. But I like to make sure that fishing reel grease is used. They're designed specifically for fishing reels, and they'll give you the longest lasting protection between your services. Just cleaning this up a little bit with some steel wool. Okay, let's go over the business end of this reel then. Let's go ahead and put that spool back in. So this one's kind of interesting. You have 3 bridge screws, and you also have a plate, a screw that holds the pinion gear assembly on. That needs to come out when you do this reel. Alright, first up then, we'll take the 3 screws off the side. Now I opened up an Okuma Convector the other day, or Classic, one of the two, I can't remember. It's the other day, it's been a while now, and it had the same internals here. So I don't know if it was made in the same plant or the design was sold, or what the deal was with that, but they were darn near identical in terms of the design. Okay, I left these out again because I want to make sure that all 3 screws are the same length. And many of you folks have seen me. I use 2 trays occasionally. One I like to put the external pieces on, the other I like to put the internal pieces on. So there we go. Alright, I'm going to pull all of the assembly out right now. And while I have that assembly out, I am going to remove this screw, because when you go to reassemble, you can't do it any other way. This plate has to come off. So if you're stuck on your reassembly wondering how that anti-reverse dog works, you have to take that bridge plate off to do it. You can get the bridge off, but you can't get it back on that way. Okay, so that's your assembly. Just going to clean up a little bit on this, just like we did with the other piece. Doesn't seem to be in terrible condition at all. There's a little bit of dried grease on there. We'll just make sure that all of that comes out. And inspect the spool gear while I have this off. That's fine. We'll remove that. This is the piece that goes onto the back of the bridge plate. And then this is our gear assembly. So we have the pinion shaft, and then we have a series of gears in here. Okay, so it's time to do the drag washer reassembly then. Interesting, this assembly came out with the drag washers facing the gear sleeve. Now, I haven't done one of these in quite some time, to be honest with you. I'm going to assume that's the way it has to work because of the reassembly process. But most of the time you'll see them sitting upright like this as opposed to sort of backwards, but I'll trust it. Okay, we have a series of fabric washers and a series of plastic or hard washers. These don't need lubrication. So we start with the main gear. First in is a red washer. Next up is a round washer. Next up is a second red washer. Then we put in the geared or keyed washer that'll run flat with this main gear. We take one of the plastic washers there, and then the last one will go on top. And as unusual as this seems, that's the way this was stacked. So we're going to put that in. We're going to grab the second hard washer there, and this will be the cap washer, and then that cap washer will be the what is pressed on to compress your drag stack to hold your force. Okay, this is the way the drag stack installs then, and we're going to put that into the assembly hole there. And this is why I say probably has to go in this way, because if you tried to put it in the other way, the key washers would fall out, and there's no way to adjust those on reassembly. Okay, then we're going to grab the, let's see if we can hold that from going anywhere. I'm going to grab the spool gear and the yoke. Brush, we'll put a little bit more grease onto the yoke. Just put it on the shoulder, you don't need to put it on the sides. The spool gear comes in two sizes. It has a side that accepts the spool, and it has a gear side that works against the main gear. We'll make sure that that has lubrication on it as well. We'll go ahead and we'll put that in next. And you have to do it in this sequence because you will run into problems if you don't with this next piece, which is the jack, but it's also the kick for the free spool release. It's going to kick it back into gear. And we have these little screws, which I never do well with. I got a little bit of grease on this magnetic screwdriver here. Let's see if we can grab that screw and start it that way. I probably could have, except that I didn't have the hole lined up. Let's try this again. And then those of you that watch my videos know I have some trouble with these small screws, so if you'll just bear with me, we'll get it. Third time's usually a charm. There we go. So we'll get that screw in, that'll compress down the yoke. There you go. And so what's going to happen here is this will all be pushed down, and then when this little stud here hits this ramp, it's going to trip the free spool back up. Okay, I mentioned before that this has to be done kind of in an oddball sequence here because of the anti-reverse. You had to pull that whole piece off. The anti-reverse now can be installed. The anti-reverse belongs on those teeth there, and it's held in place by this little pivot kind of a bullet looking thing. I'm going to grab a little pliers here to hold that. And it installs that way. So that's properly installed now for an anti-reverse. And you can see that pivot there. Next up then is the bridge assembly. Before I do that, we can put a little bit of grease onto the end of that shaft. Bridge assembly goes in next. So we're almost reversing the way that we did this. We're not almost reversing, we are reversing. And then we have those 3 bridge screws. I'm trying to hold this all together by my hands right now, because after we get these bridge screws in, we're pretty much home free in terms of having anything go boing. And I start with that one in the corner there because that's got my anti-reverse pivot. It's also holding that spring. I'll come over to the other side now. I can probably put that down at this point. So these Tidewaters are very durable. You can see it's a relatively simple design there, and the parts are high quality parts, and this one's been lasting quite some time. I think this reel probably went out of production at least a dozen or more years ago, and like I said, I haven't seen one in a while, but I do have a bucket of parts here should anybody need them. Okay, and then the last thing then is to center up this and to install this screw that's going to hold the shaft in place. That's just a matter of getting it centered. Like that. And one more screw for me to drop. Okay, put that back in. Then we can go put the externals back together, and we should have a nice functioning reel that's been cleaned and lubricated and ready to go back fishing again. Okay, get that off the table, give it a spin. Alright, so now we load up the 2 tension washers. Bushing with the small cap for the bearing. And we can bring the drag adjuster in. Okay, so my camera just quit with a battery, so I'm not quite sure what picked it up. So what we just did is we loaded in the sequence, then we put the tension washers, we put the bearing, the bushing, the small washer for the bearing, the top washer. We have a nice smooth functioning reel at this point. Now we'll just make sure that the click mechanism is working, the throw for the release. Now, one of the things I've always noticed with these reels, there's on one side of that anti-reverse gear, there's a pivot which is going to throw this. If you happen to be trying to load your, right there, this is it. It's hitting the pivot there. You need to turn the reel a click, and it'll come back in. It's one of those annoying little things that you learn with this reel. Okay, so with that, then we're going to put the side plate back on. Already taking care of the back side. We'll just take a little bit of grease onto the spool shaft here. Load the main piece up. We're going to remember, as we did the screws, that the long screws go into the case and the short screws go into the crossbars, so let's pull those out right now. 3 long, 2 short. Here's a case, so we'll go put the long one in there. Tighten that down. So this is one more design of a reel that you may or may not be familiar with. If you see it out in the flea markets, as long as it's functioning, I would tell you go ahead and get it. But if it needs parts other than some of the parts that I may have, you're going to have difficulty finding those parts. You may be able to find a donor reel on eBay in order to do that, but this would be a risk. If you didn't have the parts, it'd be a risk if that reel is not working properly to think that you can go home and just oil, lube, and take apart and clean, because if there is a broken part in here, you're going to have some difficulty locating the replacement. As I mentioned, this one breaks most frequently. They're pretty soft plastics for the star adjuster. That cap on the side plate there falls off, and unfortunately that's another one that's no longer available, and it's a shame that you have to ruin a reel like that because of 1 or 2 parts that are not available. Okay, last of the side plate screws then, and we'll put the handle and the tension washer and the like on there, and this one will be done. One of the advantages of using those parts trays there is you can tell what parts are still left, and a quick glance tells you next up then is the tension washer. It sits between your star adjuster and your handle, then the handle, then the 10mm nut cap. Tighten that down, then the little Loctite nut. I like to put that on before I finally tighten it, because you can use this wrench to align that hole, and then you can put your screw in and complete the job. So that's it, the Shakespeare 30L. In this case it's the LC with the line counter, and this is a nice reel. Gary will be able to take this one fishing for a long time to come. The drag is tightened down nicely. Everything is as it should be, and there you go. So I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please like it. Please subscribe if you're not a subscriber already. Any comments, please leave the comments or questions. I respond to all of those. And I thank you for watching. This is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. Have a great day.